Chapter 22 The Procession. Before Hesteban could call together her thoughts and consider that was practicable to be done in this new and startling aspect of affairs, the sound of military music was heard approaching along a continuous street. It denoted the advance of the procession of magistrates and citizens on its way towards the meeting house where in compliance with the customs thus early established, and ever since after, the Reverend Mr. Disney was to deliver an election sermon. Soon the head of the procession showed itself with a slow and stately march, turning a corner and making its way across the marketplace. First came the music. It comprised a variety of instruments, perhaps imperfectly adapted to one another, and played with no great skill, but yet attaining the great object for which the harmony of drum and clarion addresses itself to the multitude, that of imparting a higher and more heroic air to the scene of life that passes before the eye. Little Bear at first clapped her hands, but then lost for an instant the restless agitation that had kept her in a continual effervescence. Throughout the morning she gazed silently, and seemed to be borne upward like a Florencia bird, on the long waves and swells of sound. But she was brought back to her former mood by the shimmer of the sunshine on the weapons and bright armour of the military company, which followed after the music and formed the honorary escort of the procession. This body of soldiers, which still sustains a corps, right existence, and marches down from past ages with an ancient and horrible fame, was composed of no mercenary materials. Its ranks were filled with gentlemen who felt the stirrings of material impulse and thought to establish a kind of college of arms, whereas in association of Knights Templars. They might learn the science, and so far as peaceful exercise will teach them the practice of war. The high estimation then placed upon the military character might be seen in the lovely part of each individual member of the company. Some of them ended by their service in the Low Countries and on other fields of European warfare, had fairly won the title to assume the name and pomp of soldiership. The entire array, moreover, clad in burnished steel and with plumage nodding over their bright Marius had a brilliancy of effect which no modern display can aspire to equal. And yet the men of civil eminence who came immediately behind the military escort were very worth a thoughtful service eye. Even in outward demeanour they showed a stamina and majesty that made the warrior's haughty stride look vulgar, if not absurd. It was an age when what we call talent had far less consideration than now, but the massive materials which produce stability and dignity of character a great deal more. The people possessed by hereditary right the quality of reverence, which in their descendants, if it is survived at all, exists in a smaller proportion and with a vastly diminished force in the selection and estimate of public men. The change may be for good or ill, and it's probably perhaps for both. In that old day the English settlers on these rude shores, having left kin, nobles, and all degrees of awful rank behind, while still the faculty and necessity of reverence were strong in him, bestowed it on the white-haired and venerable brown of age, on long tried in theory and solid wisdom and sad-colored experience, on endowments of that grave and higher order which gives the idea of performance, and comes under the general definition of respectability. This primitive statement, therefore, Bradstreet and the Count Dudley Bellingham and their compeers, who were elevated to power by the early choice of the people, seem to have been not often brilliant, but distinguished by a ponderous story rather than a theory of talent. They had fortitude and self-reliance, and in time of difficulty or peril, stood up for the welfare of the state like a line of claims against a tempestuous tide. The traits of character here indicated were well represented in the square cast of countenance and large physical development of the new colonial magistrates. So far as the manner of natural authority was concerned, the mother country need not have been ashamed to see these famous men of an actual democracy adopted into the House of Peers, or by the Privy Council of the Sovereign. Next in order to the magistrates came the young and eminently distinguished divine, from whose lips the religious discourse of the anniversary was expected. His was the profession at that era, in which intellectual ability displayed itself for far more than in political life, for leaving a higher motive out of the question. It offered enthusement powerful enough, in the almost worship-themed respect of the community, to win the most aspiring ambition into its service. Even political power, as in the case of Increase Mother, was within the grasp of a successful priest. It was the observation of those who beheld him now that never since Mr. James first set his foot on the New England shore had he exerted much energy as was seen in the gait and air with which he kept his pace in the procession. There was no feebleness of step, as at other times, his frame was not bent, nor did his hand rest ominously upon his heart. Yet if the clergyman were rightly viewed, his strength seemed not of the body. It might be spiritual, and imparted to him by angelic ministrations. It might be the acceleration of that patent cordial, which is distilled only in the furnace glow of earnest and long-continued thought. Or perchance his sensibility temperament was invigorated by the loud and piercing music that swayed heavenward and outlived him on its ascending way. Nevertheless, so astral was his look, it might be questioned whether Mr. Dixon even heard the music. There was his body moving onward and with an unaccustomed force, but where was his mind? Far and deep in its own region, busying itself with preternatural activity to marshal a procession of stately thoughts that were soon to issue thence. And so he saw nothing, heard nothing, knew nothing of what was around him, but the spiritual element took up the feeble frame and carried it along unconscious of the burden, and converting it to spirit like itself. Men of uncommon intellect who have grown morbid possess this occasional pocket of the mere effort, into which they throw the life of many days, and then are lifeless for as many more. Mr. Pine, gazing thoughtfully at the clergyman, felt a dreary influence come over her, but wherefore of glance she knew not, unless that he seemed some remote from her own sphere, and utterly beyond her reach. One glance of recognition she had imagined vast needs passed between them. She thought of the dim forest with its little veil of solitude, and love and anguish and the massive tree trunk were sitting hand in hand. They had mingled their sad and passionate thought with the melancholy murmur of the brook. How deeply had they known each other then, and was this the man? He hardly knew him now. He moved imprudently past, enveloped, as it were, in the rich music with the precision of majesty and venerable fathers. He saw unattainable in his worldly position, and still more so in that far bestowed her unsparing thoughts, through which she now beheld him. Her spirit sank with the idea that almost had been a delusion, and that, vividly as she had dreamed it, there could be no real bond betwixt the clergyman and herself. And thus much of woman was there in Hester, that she could scarcely forgive him, least of all now, when the heavy footsteps of their approaching pet might be heard nearer, nearer, nearer. For being able to completely withdraw himself from the unusual world while she groped darkly, and stretched forth her cold hands and found him not. Pearl either saw and responded to her mother's feeling, or herself felt the remoteness and intangibility that had fallen around the minister. While the procession passed, the child was uneasy, fluttering up and down, like a bird on the point of taking flight. When the wall had gone by, she looked up into Hester's face. "Mother," said she, "was that the same minister that kissed me by the brook?" "Hold thy peace, dear little bear," whispered her mother. "We must not always talk in the marketplace of what happens to us in the forest. I could not be sure that it was he, so strange he looked," continued the child, "else I would have run to him and bid him kiss me now, before all the people, even as he did yonder among the dark old trees. What would the minister have said, mother? Would he have clamped his hand over his heart and scowled on me and bid me begone? "What should he say, Pearl?" answered Hester, "save that it was not time to kiss, and that kisses are not to be given in the market-place? Well for thee, foolish child, that thou didst not speak to him." Another share of the same sentiment in reference to Mr. Dinsday was expressed by a person whose eccentricities, or insanity as we should term, led her to do what few of the townspeople would have ventured on, to begin a conversation with the wearer of the scarlet letter in public. It was Mistress Higgins, who, attired in great magnificence with a triple ruff, a broidered stomacher, a gown of rich velvet, and a gold-headed cane, had come forth to see the procession. As this ancient lady had the renown which subsequently cost her no less a price than her life, of being a principal actor in all wars of necromancy that were continually going forward, the crowd gave way before her, and seemed to fear the touch of her garment, as if it carried the plague among its gorgeous folds, seen in conjunction with Hester Prynne, kindly as so many now felt towards the latter. The dread inspired by Mistress Higgins was doubled, and caused a general movement from that part of the market-place in which the two women stood. "Now, what mortal imagination could conceive it?" whispered the old lady confidentially to Hester, "yonder divine man, that saint on the earth, as the people uphold him to be, and as I must needs say, he really looks. Who now that saw him pass in the procession will think how little while it since he went forth out of his study, showing a herb test of scripture in his mouth, I grant, to take an airing in the forest. Ha! We know what that means, Hester Prynne, but truly, for so, I find it hard to believe him the same man. Many a church member saw it, so I, walking behind the music that has danced in the same measure with me. Then somebody was fiddler, and it might be an Indian powwow, or a Lapland wizard changing hands with us. That is but a triumph, when a woman knows the word. By this minister could unusually tell Hester whether was the same man that encountered tea on the forest path. "Madam, I know not of what you speak, answered Hester Prynne, feeling Mistress Hughes to be of infirm mind, yet strangely startled in a way stricken by the confidence with which she affirmed a personal connection between so many persons, herself among them, and the evil one. "It is not for me to talk lightly of a learned and pious minister of the world, like the Reverend Mr. Disdale." "Fie, woman, fie!" cried the old lady, shaking her finger at Hester. "Thus to think I have been to the forest so many times, and have yet no skill to judge who else has been there? Yea, thou no leaves of the wild garlands, which they wore while they danced, be left in their hair. I know thee, Hester, for I behold the token. We may all see it in the sunshine, and it was like a red flame in the dark. The world is it only, so there need be question about that. But this minister, let me tell thee in thy ear, when the black man sees one of his own servants signing sealed, so shy of owning on to the bond as the Reverend Mr. Dinsday, he had a way of ordering matters so that the mark shall be disclosed in open daylight to the eyes of all the world. What is that the minister seeks to hide, with his hand always over his heart? Ha, Hester Prime! Where is it, good Mistress Higgins? Eagerly asked her little pair. Hast thou seen it? No matter, darling, responds Mr. Higgins, making Perla perfect reverence. Thou thyself wilt see it, one time or another. They say, child, thou art of the lineage of the prince of the air. Wilt ride with me some fine night so to see thy father? Then thou shalt know wherefore the minister keeps his hand over his heart. Lowing so surely that all the marketplace could hear her, the word of the gentlewoman took her departure. By this time the preliminary prayer had been offered at the meeting house, and the accents of the Reverend Mr. Dinsday were heard commencing his discourse. An irresistible feeling kept Hester near to the spot, as the sacred edifice was too much thronged to admit another auditor. She took up her position close beside the scaffold of the pillory. It was in sufficient proximity to bring the whole sermon to her ears, in the shape of an indistinctive but varied murmur and flow of the minister's very peculiar voice. This vocal organ was itself a rich endowment, insomuch that a listener, comprehending nothing of the language in which the preacher spoke, might still have been swayed to and fro by the mere tone and cadence. Like all other music, it breathed passion and pathos, an emotion high or there, in a tongue native to the human heart, wherever educated. Muffled as the sound was by its passage through the church walls, Hester Prynne listened with such intentness and sympathized so intimately that the sermon had throughout a meaning for her, entirely apart from its undistinguishable words. This, perhaps, is more distantly heard, might have been only a grosser medium and have clouded the spiritual sense. Now she caught the low undertone as of the wind sinking down to repose itself, then ascended with it as it rose through progressive gradation of sweetness and power, until its volume seemed to envelop her with an atmosphere of away and solemn grandeur. And yet, majestic as the voice sometimes became, there was forever in it an essential character of plaintiveness, a loud or low expression of anguish, the whisper or distracted as it might be conceived of suffering humanity that touched of a sensibility in every bosom. At times this deep strain of pathos was all that could be heard, and scarcely heard, singing it amid a desolate silence, but even when the minister's voice grew high and commanding, when it gushed irrepressibly upward, when it assumed its almost breathed power, so utterly overfilling the church as to burst its way through the solid walls, and diffuse itself in the open air. Still, if the auditor listened intently, and for the purpose, he could detect the same cry of pain. What was it? The complaint of human heart, so relentless, perchance guilty, telling its secret, whether of guilty or sorrow, the great heart of mankind, beseeching its sanctuary of forgiveness. At every moment, in each accent, and never in vain, it was this profound and continual undertone that gave the clergyman his most appropriate power. During all this time Hester stood, statue-like, at the foot of the scaffold. If the minister's voice had not kept her there, there would nevertheless have been an inevitable magnetism in that spot. whence she dared the first hour of her lives of ignominy. There was a sense wearing her, too ill-defined to be made a thought, but he weighed heavily on her mind, that her whole arc of life, both before and after, was connected with his spot, as with the one point that gave it unity. Little Pearl, meanwhile, had quit her mother's side, and was playing at her own while about the market-place. She made the sun crown cheerful by her erratic and glistering ray, even as a bird of bright plumage illuminates a gold tree of dusky foliage by darting to and fro, half seen and half concealed amid the twilight of the clustering leaves. She had an exhilarating, but ofttimes a sharp and irregular movement. It indicated the restless vivacity of her spirit, which today was duly indefatigable in its tiptoe dance, because it was played upon and prepared with her mother's disquietude. Whenever Pearl saw anything to excite her ever active and wandering curiosity, she flew thitherward in, as he might say, seized upon the man or thing as her own property, so far as she desired it, but without yielding the meanest degree of control over her emotions in requital. The Puritans looked on, and if they smiled, were none the less inclined to pronounce the child a demon offspring, from the undescribable charm of beauty and eccentricity that shone through her light figure, and sparkled with its activity. She ran and looked the wild Indian in the face, and he grew conscious of nature's wilder that than his own. Thence, with native audacity, but still with reserve as characteristic, she flee into the midst of a group of mariners, the savage-shaken wheelmen of the ocean, as the Indians were of the land, and the guests wondering glen in admiring at bird, as if a flake of the sea foam had taken the shape of a little maid, and were gifted with a soul of the sea fire, that flashes beneath their prow in the night time. One of these sea-faring men, the shipmaster indeed who had spoken to his friend, was so smeared with Pearl's aspect that he attempted to lay hands upon her with purpose to snatch a kiss. Finding it as impossible to touch her as to catch a hummingbird in the air, he took from his hat the gold chain that was twisted about it, and threw it to the child. Pearl immediately twined it around her neck and waist, with such happy skill that once seen there, it became a part of her, and it was difficult to imagine her without it. "Thy mother is yonder woman with the scarlet letter," said the seaman. "Wilt thou carry her a message from me?" "If the message pleases me, I will," answered Pearl. "Then tell her," rejoined he, "that I speak again with the black-visaged, open-shouldered old doctor, and he engages to bring his friend, the gentleman she wot of, aboard with him. So let thy mother take to town, save for herself and thee. Wilt thou tell her this, too, wish baby?" "Mistress Heaven says my father is the prince of the air," cried Pearl with her naughty smile. "If thou callest me that ill name, I shall then hear of thee, and he will chase thy ship with a tempest." Pursuing a zigzag course across the market-place, the child returned to her mother and communicated what the marnet had said. Esther strong calm steadfastly enduring the spirit almost sank, at last, on beholding this dark and grim countenance of an inevitable doom, which, at the moment when a passage seemed to open for the minister herself out of their labyrinth of misery, showed itself with an unrelenting smile, right in the midst of their path. With her mind harassed by the terrible perplexity in which the shipmaster's intelligence involved her, she was also subjected to another threat. There were many people present from the country round about who had often heard of the Scarlet Letter, and to whom it had been made terrific by hundred thoughts or exaggerated rumors, but who had never beheld it with their own bodily eyes. This, after exhausting other modes of amusement, now trudged about Hester Prynne with rude embarrassing intrusiveness, and conspicuous as it was, however, it could not bring them nearer than a circuit of several yards. At that distance they accordingly stood, fixed there by the stiff light of the repugnant, which the mystic symbol inspired. The well line of sailors, likewise, observing the press of the spectators, and learning the purport of the Scarlet Letter, came and thrust their sunburnt and desperado-looking faces into the ring. Even the Indians were affected by a sort of cold shadow of the white man's curiosity, and gliding through the crowd, fastened their snake-like black eyes on Hester's bosom, conceiving perhaps that the wearer of this brilliantly embroidered badge must needs be a personage of high dignity among her people. Lastly, the inhabitants of the town, their own interest in this worn-out subject lightly reviving itself by sympathy with what they saw still, longed early to the same Carter, and tormented Hester Prynne, perhaps more than all the rest, with their club, with a questioned gaze at her familiar shame. Esther saw and recognized the self-same faces of that group of matrons who had awaited her forthcoming from the prison door 7 years ago, all save one, the youngest and only compassionate among them, whose brutal wrath she had since met. At the final hour, when she was so soon to fling aside the burning letter, it had strangely become the centre of more remarkable excitement, and was thus made so to sear his breast more painfully than at any time since the first day she put it on. While Hester stood in that magic circle of inner meaning, where the canonic contrary of her sentence seemed to have fixed her forever, the admirable preacher was looking down from the sacred pulpit upon an audience, whose very inmost spirit had yielded to his control. The sainted minister in church, the woman of the scarlet letter in the market-place. What imagination would have been irreverent enough to surmise that the same scorching stigma was on them both?